Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. So today is going to be just a crash course on the Adrenaline Rush build that I've been running. There's a lot of stuff I want to discuss, like the gear and perks and how they all mesh together. I also want to go into some of the weapons and which ones I'm using effectively, damage numbers, damage totals, and kind of what your options are in terms of what weapons. I had a huge amount of support for the last video and I thank you all so much. Today is going to be basically how can we build out a cheap budget starter build and use it effectively. So I'm not going to get into crazy details about purple gear and killing 3-man groups. The main goal of this video is to kind of get you guys rolling on how to be successful with this gear and this build before the playtest ends. So yeah, that wasn't the cleanest fight in the world, but that was using a pretty cheap setup, which you can see here. I actually ended up killing 3 more guys that walked into this room almost immediately after. That's a video for another time though. Okay, so let's get into the meat of this discussion, which is basically your key concepts on gear and weapons. Alright, so we have the fighter class, so let's talk about some gear options. There's a lot of stuff to go over here, but I just want to show you some of the basic things before the shop change. A lot of people have been asking why I'm running a second option or secondary weapon in this slot. Basically because you have the dual wield perk on the fighter class. 15% attack speed is a lot, and even not using Adrenaline Rush, this attack speed alone will carry you through a lot of fights. So you have that in combination to temporary 10% increase, 10% power increase with each successful melee attack within 3 seconds. And yes, with this short sword you can land a lot very quickly. So these 3 things all go together very, very well. I usually take the reduced base movement speed and then projectile resistance. The reason for projectile resistance over some of the others, if I look quickly, you'll see the armor rating one, which is kind of a decent option. You're not going to be doing any blocking. You're not going to be using counterattack. You're not going to be using barricade. You're not going to be using shield expert. Weapon mastery is not needed. The only other option you have is defense expert, which if you look at how much it actually does, the physical damage reduction on these budget builds is just useless. So this is pretty much if you're going full tank. So projectile, even still, the projectile resistance is huge. You get a huge jump. So run projectile resistance and it's way more useful. Okay, so here's my kind of basic tip when it comes to some of the gear, and you'll see it here. Pants are a huge upgrade over your these leather leggings are a huge upgrade over your cloth pants. You know, almost 10 armor rating, and you keep your movement speed the same on top of getting some magic resistance. And this helmet, we'll check the shop, see if there's any here. These helmets are super cheap. This one here especially, kettle hat's only 8 gold. So 16, you get your 10% headshot reduction, your projectile reduction, magic resistance on the kettle hat, which is very useful, and it doesn't slow you down very much. The whole theme of this class is being very, very fast and dealing as much damage as fast as possible. So we're trying to do that. So the other items you're going to be looking for are actually some of the cheapest items in the game, which is the falchion, the short sword, and well, the crossbow isn't necessarily cheap. However, if you go to the woodsman, you can get lucky and roll some pretty decent crossbows, which I'm actually going to buy these because I will burn through these in no time. So yeah, we want those. And actually, a very interesting thing is if he has a white campfire kit, it can also be very useful because it will actually refresh your adrenaline rush if you use campfire after you've popped it once, which is probably the biggest issue with adrenaline rush, is that you only get it once. Okay, so now let's get into kind of the most important and fun part of this whole build, is your weapon options. This offhand weapon actually benefits your entire class because if I have 2 strength, like this short sword is, it's actually giving me 2 strength over my class when I have these 2 weapons out. The other thing to mention with short sword is the combination play with it, which I'll show examples of all this stuff and all these weapons coming up. The combination with it, doing a 1-2 and a 1-2, is extremely quick. rather than waiting for the third swing on each of their combination or chains of attack. The Falchion is a slow weapon by nature, and it's actually incredibly strong when you start adding the 15% attack speed, simply because you have the offhand weapon. Like, I bought this dagger for 6 gold, and literally makes the Falchion so much stronger just because you're getting that 15% attack speed. You can have a dagger here that has +1 strength, anything cheap, and they're probably one of the cheapest items in the game on the market right now as well. All 3 of these swords are super cheap, and you can find blues and greens of any of them for around 50 gold each. I mean, most of these weapons I bought for less than 100 gold, and people are just getting rid of them now, and I hope you guys get a chance to try them out before this playtest ends. The last thing I will mention, which can be overlooked, is how important sprint is. Every fighter takes sprint just simply because movement speed is so incredibly important in this game, and like I said, the whole goal of this class is getting in close and dealing as much damage as fast as possible. Okay, so moving on to weapons. Short sword I'm going to start with because I had a lot of questions about short sword and why I was not using it in the last video. Main reason being that I probably had a short sword that didn't have good stats on it, so I just relied purely on my arming sword. Here's an example of what I meant when I said attack pattern or attack chains. If you use the 1-2 swing and then the 1-2 of the arming sword, you can get out 4 really quick attacks. It takes a lot of getting used to, and sometimes it's best just to rely on your arming sword because it deals a little bit more damage. That being said, as you make money or get better at this, if you want to match up a really good arming sword or Falchion with a really good short sword, I actually recommend it. Having a blue short sword with the ability to do like 50 or 60 damage in those quick swings is definitely worth it in close. So moving on to arming sword, which this video was posted earlier, but I just want to revisit it because I actually made a few mistakes here. First being I actually popped Adrenaline Rush way too early. I should have been a lot closer before hitting it. I thought they were going to push me, but then all of a sudden they turned around. And the other thing is, once you pop Adrenaline Rush, your recovery on your hits, so even if you're hitting walls, is super fast. However, I probably should have been using a short sword or something tight when I was falling down these stairs. The great thing about arming sword is that it does the 2 hits really fast, and if you have Adrenaline Rush running, you only get to see it at the very end of this where I actually get 2 successful swings and then that final stab. That final stab actually does a lot more damage. And it has good reach. So what tends to happen for me a lot is I hit those first 2 hits and then people actually back up, and then because my sprint has maybe worn off or I don't have the movement speed, it's actually hard to get it close enough with the short sword. So that final finishing swing on the arming sword is really nice. Okay, so the last weapon I really wanted to discuss with you guys was the Falchion. It is actually my #1 pick for a budget build because they're everywhere and everyone hates them for some reason. Actually, I can understand it because in my last video about the fighter class, Falchion was probably my least favorite. The main issue with it being it's slow, it slows you down more, and the swing speed's slow. But when you're using this build, a lot of those weaknesses are kind of hidden, and when you're pumping out 70 damage per hit, this isn't even a very strong Falchion I'm using here, but when you start adding up that combo attack damage, because your attack speed's a little faster, and then you start pressing Adrenaline Rush when you're getting into fights, man, can you deal some damage. I have videos I'm going to post in the future of me taking out teams of 3 and stuff with this weapon, basically just using a green Falchion. So I highly recommend it, even if you have a really tight budget and just throw in a dagger just to give yourself that attack speed bonus. It works great. If you want to combo it with a short sword and then use your Falchion for wide swings and then follow up with a short sword to finish them off, also works very well. So that's just about all I want to cover, but I did want to say that if you're going to try to test this build out, I recommend going in Goblin Caves and just going in and fighting people and see what you think of it. That's how I kind of learned a lot of the stuff about it. Obviously take meds because you're not going to have second wind, and just give it a shot. I think Goblin Caves is a great place to go in and learn in PvP. I did find at the end of it I was fighting way too many newbies, so I just stopped. I kind of started to feel bad because it was just 1v1 with this setup, even with green items, is pretty challenging for some of the people you'll see in Goblin Caves. I expect it to get more difficult as people start to burn through some gear. But look, I thank you all I appreciate all the people subscribing. I haven't been doing this very long, but I'm going to try to keep putting out some interesting stuff for you guys. I have a whole bunch of successes and failures with this build itself, and some other classes I've been working on. So cheers, and have a great end of the playtest.